Welcome to Cultural Brilliance Radio, the DNA of organizational excellence with Claudette Rowley. Conversations that are transforming the world of culture and business. Claudette brings fresh, innovative perspectives that push the boundaries of what organizational cultures can and should be. Learn how to catalyze your organization's workforce into an authentic, intentional, and financially successful culture. Now here's your host, Claudette Rowley.
Hi, everybody. You're listening to Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of organizational excellence on Transformation Talk Radio. And we have a very, very special show today with a very special guest, Dr. Pat Baccili, who I'm sure many of you know is the founder and head of the Transformation Talk Radio Network, and also the host of the internationally acclaimed Dr. Pat show, Talk Radio to Thrive By, which has been the #1 talk radio show in Seattle, right? Many years running. And I know from my personal experience working with you, Dr. Pat, and many others, that you've touched the lives of millions and millions of people around the world. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. And what I just realized after 15 years doing this, right, and supposed to be in the sound business, what I realized that I'm probably not even getting the sound coming through my headset right now. We're just going to take that thing off because I think it's coming through my computer. And so I'm going to let Carter worry about that.
Good idea.
It's so funny moments, right?
Right.
You know, Claudette, thank you for inviting me today to be part of this and be part of the show with you. And before we got on air, what I was saying was I tried to remember a time of not knowing you, not knowing your journey, your passion, what you wanted to get done in the world. And what I was really struck by as I was talking to Linda about it and talking about getting ready for this show is that I've worked with a lot of people over time, and I've never quite worked with someone that was so focused, so clear, so determined, and so results oriented, yet at the same time, so brilliantly conceptual and wanting to create a better workplace for people and better lives. And I was struck by the little tiny amount of time between when we first met and where we are today. And maybe for you, you're thinking, wow, that is not a tiny amount of time.
Yeah.
But in the age of media and book writing and brand development, this is a short period of time, because today we're talking about something special, aren't we?
We are talking about the launch of the Cultural Brilliance book, right? Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of Organizational Excellence, which launches on January 22nd. Yeah, 11 short days from now. Yeah. And to your point, Pat, I mean, we met in the spring of 2016. Yeah, so really not much time at all.
No. And you know, part of this too is watching the evolution conceptually for you, but that was born of the passion that you have for organizations. And certainly you and I share a lot. But one of the things I want to do is I want to get to the journey with you.
Okay.
It is a journey. And it's not easy to say yes to your passion. At least maybe I'm projecting on myself right now. But I want to ask you, Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of Organizational Excellence, the book itself, is born out of a deep, passionate, strong conviction for creating a better workplace. How does the book reflect that passion and that commitment to people in the workplace?
I mean, the book is, and thanks for saying that, it does. And I mean, when I think about the book, and I think that the seeds for it were planted literally, you know, when I was in my mid-20s and late 20s. You know, I had two jobs, and the first job was an organization in which had a pretty good culture. And I saw how I thrived there. My level of confidence, the creativity, I got to do really interesting, innovative things. And believe it or not, this was a state agency, right? Not necessarily known for its innovation, but where I worked, it was innovative. And then I moved to a different state, and I got a job at a nonprofit. I used to be a social worker, and the nonprofit was pretty toxic culturally. And I saw that even though I brought in my same competence, my same passion, my same creativity, my confidence started to decrease quite a bit because of the toxicity. And I noticed that at the time, and was starting to compare and contrast it. And actually, looking back on it, I remember I started to read books on leadership. I was just interested in how leaders impacted culture and how, I didn't know what I was going to do with all this reading on leadership because I wasn't a coach yet or a consultant. I was still a social worker. So, but that's where I think the passion really came from, was seeing how I thrived. And then I really didn't, and how much that hurt my confidence as a person to be in that environment when I look back on it. That was really the seed. But what you were saying about the passion for a better workplace, it's actually it is that. And when we expand it out, it's a passion for a better world. I mean, it's really, when I was thinking about, in the few months before I met you in 2016, at the end of 2015, when the very seeds for this kind of cultural change were born, and I started to get these initial ideas about how the model and the process could work. It was through thinking, there has to be a better way to do things. We could solve almost every problem we have in the world. We have the knowledge, and it's about will, and why aren't we doing this better? And that's really where it comes from. And I think the book reflects that. It's talking about business and organizations, but we can extrapolate all the ideas out into the bigger aspects of the world culturally.
Yeah. And what I love about this is when you take off the boundaries of what you think you know about things, new ideas get born, new things emerge. Things that you've talked about on your radio show, things that you've talked about, certainly to me, but most importantly, the book itself. And what I love about this and very excited about is you're introducing a model that not just addresses the culture of an organization, but as an individual, as an employee in the organization, you can look at this and say, wow, now wait a minute. Those 3 things, those 4 things, these concepts, these ideas, this is not only about like this company, but these are things that represent a way to live by. Tell us a little bit about really the most prominent concepts in Cultural Brilliance.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, the book is really, when I boil it down, the book is about potential. And the book is about potential in, its position is it's about potential in organizations that every day, almost every company I see or read about or have been in and know about is leaving tons of potential on the table in terms of their culture, right? The culture could be so much more than it is, and it's not. And I think, when you look at the basic tenets of the book, the first phase of the process is authenticity, right? Which is about, and you know about this, Dr. Pat, right? It's about respect and truth telling. It's about, this is how our culture really, really operates. Let's get to the bottom of it. And I think that applies to individual people too. Let's tell the truth about what you want, right? What's really going on for you? What are your belief systems, et cetera? And then, the second, at a high level, the second phase of the process is this design process, right? How do we take all this information once we've excavated how the culture really operates, and we've started to discover how we really need it to operate? How do we bridge that gap? And that's the design. And again, with individual people, I've been a coach for almost 20 years, right? We're always helping people design individually what they want their lives or their careers to look like. The same kinds of principles apply there. And then again, at a high level, the final phase of the process is integration or implementation. So that's where we're taking all this design and planning and knowledge and wisdom and learning and deciding how are we going to actually functionally integrate this, right? And that's where the change actually happens in an organization or in a person, right? That's where you're taking action, and we don't change until we've taken action and done something different. Yeah, the book is a lot about mindsets and behaviors too, which also really, of course, apply to the individual.
Well, part of this too is when we're thinking about introducing this to the world, to organizations, to companies, it's not quite as easy as you and I probably are making it sound to people today, is how to put this together. But I want to ask you, and this is a question that I've asked countless people on my show. It's actually my signature question, but I really want to ask you. I want to ask, now look, I've talked a little bit about the book, but you are a consultant, you are a coach, right? You are that and much more out in the world. In front of organizations, really tackling some of the most critical problems they have. And in the end, it's all about results, as in one-on-one coaching. You're speaker, you're a seminar leader. But given all of that, here comes the book, Cultural Brilliance, right? Fabulous book, which we're going to talk about in more detail. I want to know, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the obstacles that you personally had to overcome to bring you to, like right now, this moment today, here talking about the book?
Yeah. The personal challenges were really dealing with some obstacles that came up that were completely outside of my control, right? Like losing a publishing contract unexpectedly and then getting another, right? But which is an example, there were several things that happened that I couldn't have anticipated, couldn't have predicted or planned for. And so that is definitely always a big life lesson. And it happens in organizations all day long, right? In some cases where they can't predict certain things that are going to happen. And certainly happens in their cultures as well. That's a big part of the journey. And I think it's really been, and you mentioned at the beginning of the show that I am good at persevering and getting things done. So this journey called on that in spades, to keep going, even if it was, writing this book evenings and weekends after working all day, right? Just being able to be that focused.
Yeah. And that's really part of this, because it really does require commitment. And that's too, at the core, really underpinning of what, Cultural Brilliance is about, both the book as well as your consulting business that you do to help people get from where they are to where they want to go. I want to take a short break, and when we come back, I want to talk about cultures. And the reason I want to talk about cultures is because in the past several years, since you started this journey and started to write, the term culture has been used more in our media in this country. I can only speak for here, in this country, more so than any time in my life. It's as the word has become mainstream, yet we don't really know what it means. When we come back, we're going to talk about culture. We're going to talk about cultural brilliance. We're going to talk about authentic cultures. And then one of my favorite words on the planet, adaptogen. So we'll be right back, everyone. Welcome back. It is great to have all of you tune us in and turn us on, because I am Dr. Pat, and I get the honor of having this incredible conversation with Claudette Rowley. And why is it? Because here's what I want to say about what happens when you say yes to your life, to your passion, to being of service. The piece parts fall into place. And then you find yourself on the other end of an interview, talking about a book, talking about what's in the book, talking about your life's journey, the work you've done, and how you've been able to capture all of that, then some, in an incredible book. And that's what you've done, Claudette. Before we go ahead, can you tell folks, how do they find out more about you? How do they find out about the book? When is it available? When can people buy it?
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so my website is culturalbrilliance.com. So very easy. There's all the information about the book and my work on it. You can find a pre-order page for the pre-order page for the book right on the site. And the book then will be available on January 22nd, which is our launch day. So you can either pre-order or wait till the 22nd. Easy
and and so part of this too is you're going to be out there doing additional interviews. So, we have an hour to talk about something that took a lifetime to create, but we're going to do our best today to do it. Before the break, I said there were a number of things I want to talk with you about cultures. And my comment was that I personally believe that the word culture now has been used more in the past 2 or 3 years than I've heard in multiple business degrees, 25 years in corporate America, organizational development. I've never heard the term used so often to describe situations and things. So from your perspective, what are cultures, but how does that differ from Brilliant Cultures that also has a manifesto that goes with it?
Right. Just a few things, right. I agree. I mean, I know I've been an organizational development consultant for 19 years. And when I first started, it was almost piece of conventional wisdom to not use the word culture with clients, that you shouldn't use that word, that they would never hire you if you talked about culture. It was too fuzzy. It was too, it didn't seem connected to anything financial, right, to the bottom line. And I agree, it's changed so much now, which is actually really nice, because I think when we can talk about culture, we can talk about the truth of what's really happening. And I think of really, I define cultures as systems of mindsets, behaviors, and structures that sequence in patterns that are sometimes seen or unseen. And these patterns actually are driving communication, decision-making, and results in organizations. So they are really, when we think about culture, we're in a culture all day long, right? And sometimes, I think this is changing, but I still sometimes hear like, oh yeah, we took care of our culture 10 years ago. We don't need to focus on it anymore, and not understanding that culture isn't something you check the box on and move it over to the side because you're done. But it is something that you are in all the time. And one of the ways I'll also talk about it is sharing with folks that it's like being in your family, right? Every single family has a culture. Every family culture is different. And when you're in that family culture, whether you like it or not, you know how it works. You know what all the unspoken rules are. You know all the norms for behavior in that family culture. And organizational cultures are almost identical from that perspective. There's a lot we know that's never spoken about in those cultures.
Yeah. One of the things that I was really struck by in reading the book and going through it is to really look at your definition of culture, but your definition of culture in several ways, right? Not just what a brilliant culture is, but you're talking about cultural intelligence, you're talking about cultural systems, you're talking about these dynamics that exist, form the interaction of people at work. And I think I want to go to that because I think so much can be left out. Like, how many times have you read books? You and I both know we read the same books, I think. You read a book and they're talking about the organization. I don't know about you, but I had a tipping point in my research where I pushed back and I said, you can study psychological contracts between organization, but what the heck is that? How about people to people? Tell us about how Cultural Brilliance addresses that, what I call a gap in organizational psychology.
I think, it's a great point that in the book, I talk about organizations, businesses, companies, et cetera, but just as a way to be able to talk about it easily. But I also make the point that all an organization is a group of people trying to achieve a goal, which is a paraphrase actually of the dictionary definition, pretty much. That's when we say organization, we're actually talking about people, a group of people. It's just another way to say that. And I think when an organization or company starts to recognize that the people in the organization, the people in the company are pretty much the same thing, it changes a lot of that. It changes the psychological contract. I think, when I think about brilliant cultures and the way that I've defined them in the book and I define them with clients, I talk about them as systems that proactively respond to change in ways that decrease stress and inspire learning and then promote organizational health or growth. And the idea behind that was the fact that a culture could actually adapt to change in ways that increased its competency, right? Increased its potential as a culture. From a business perspective, increased its competitive advantage, right? So instead of change being something like, oh, we have to change again. Oh, it's going to be so hard. Oh, it's going to be so stressful. Instead of viewing it that way, which is not very adaptive or functional, although I understand it because it's human nature to respond that way to change sometimes. How about if change becomes the thing that makes you brilliant? And that is a whole different way of looking at culture. Brilliant cultures also are, I had a colleague say to me, so are you telling people what culture they need to have? And I said, no, when you go through the Cultural Brilliance system, you'll see that it's helping the culture that you need to have emerge. But I said, the one thing that I will say that I believe is the cornerstone of all great cultures is trust, respect, and truth-telling. That you've got to have that kind of psychological safety, or there's no way you can have a great culture.
No. Let's really play that point out for a minute, a little bit, if we could. When we look at organizations that have gone to their demise,
Yes.
One of the things we look at is why did they go to their demise? And I think that you have found, and I have found over my business experience, consulting experience, the number one, if not at the top, okay, the number one thing across the board, my research, other research, is respect. But underneath that, when you dig down, is what you just talked about. And let's really look at this. It's respect, it's trust, it's truth, and it's safety. And why is that important? In your book, one of the things you talk about is the signs that you are in trouble as a company is when your employees hold back information for fear and may even let a disaster happen because they're afraid to tell the truth and speak up. How important is that?
I mean, I think it's critically important, and we have, countless examples. The Challenger disaster, catastrophe was one of them. And that's pretty well known to have partially stemmed from the fact that people did not feel comfortable saying, we have a problem and it's serious. I think it's enormously important. I see it in small ways in organizations, small ways meaning non-catastrophic ways, right? And in big ways that you've got to create an environment where people will tell the truth. And even if they feel that it's risky or it makes them incredibly nervous or anxious, they know that nothing negative will happen to them. They're not going to lose their jobs. They're not going to be gossiped about behind their back, right? You've got to create an environment where people can sit down and say, I have an idea, I made a mistake, I'm really concerned about this course of action, and if we don't change it, we're going to have a big problem on our hands, right? So it's actually, when I say it like that, it's critical to business success, right? It's not just a nice to have. It's actually critical to business success, to tell the truth.
It is critical. And one of the things that I have let up on in the past is, used to be this dialogue. Do you remember this, Claudette? When people used to look at an organization and give them like a metaphor. And once upon a time, before I actually did research at Boeing, one of the things that happened was companies had metaphors like dinosaur, as an example. But here's what I come to know about that. Not every company can be this organic, let me work at home at 3 a.m.
Right.
Imagine building an airplane and waiting for the man or woman that's responsible for putting that very important bolt in a jet, right?
Yeah.
So some organizations have to have structure. You're not taking that aspect of structure away. You're saying that whatever you have, you can create a brilliant culture. Is that right?
Yeah, I think pretty much. Are there some cultures that it would be incredibly hard to heal and repair? Yes, I think that's true. But by and large, you can work with almost any kind of organizational structure. It's really about when you get into the process that I use, and I won't go into too much detail here, but the beginning of it is really to find out what are all the underlying beliefs that are driving the culture, right? And then figuring out how do those work for us? How do they not work for us? And then making a series of decisions based on that, based on the direction the company is going, or nonprofit or whatever kind of organization is going, what kind of culture do we need to support our direction? And I think that when you start to get into those kinds of conversations, you give people hope. That's what I've seen, who are like, I'm gonna stick through this for the next 6 months because I'm hoping we'll be able to change something. But if not, I may jump ship, which I've heard literally. I only stayed, Claudette, because I was hoping we could make this better. I was about to leave. And then you also, and what you start to see at that point is what I call the light coming back on in people's eyes. That the light starts to come back on, and like, this is something. There might be something good here. There might be something I want to work in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it changes everything.
Well, and part of this, you ask some very important questions. You ask questions about how do you resolve conflict? You ask questions about what do people value? You ask questions about, how do I feel about my level of creativity, how I can contribute? Are things clear? But the one thing that no one has talked about in culture is what we're going to talk about when we come back. And literally, you're not going to find a book. Everybody listening to this, I want to challenge everybody out there. Try to find a book that talks about adapting the way that Claudette in her book does when we reference something as this, an adaptogen design. What is an adaptogen? Why has that word been so prominent in many, many aspects of natural earth processes? And why is it a natural fit for people and organizations? Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Dr. Pat, and I get to do this fabulous show with Claudette Rowley because this show is Cultural Brilliance Radio. And by the way, it is about that and much more. Every week when Claudette sits down and says, I'm going to do and take a message out into the world, she talks about cultures in a very specific way. And the people she interviews, the people that you hear connecting here on the show, are people that talk about cultures, excellence, how they can shine, what the challenges are. But what you don't hear is new concepts about culture. This book, the book release, is that. Tell us about the book release again, and then we're going to talk about a concept. Some people may call it in the academic world a construct that has to do with adapting. How can people get a copy of the book? How can they find out more about you? And most importantly, how can they bring you in their organization to put you in front of their team of people?
Right. So thank you, Pat. My website is culturalbrilliance.com. Information about ordering the book, pre-ordering the book, or ordering it on January 22nd or later is right on the site. And my email address is claudette@culturalbrilliance.com. If you'd like to reach me directly, you can also find the contact info on the site. And would love to talk with anybody, have an initial conversation about your culture. Absolutely.
I love it. So I want to talk about one of the parts of the book that we haven't gotten to yet, right before we talk about the DNA of organizational excellence, because that is also a new idea. I want to talk about the notion of an adaptogen culture, which leads to an adaptogen design. Tell folks what you're referencing or what you mean when you use the word adaptogen, because that is a very powerful word once you get to know it, right?
Yeah. So adaptogens are herbal substances, and so natural medicine herbal substances that people can take that help regulate the body and de-stress it and bring it back to health. So maca, ginseng, things like that are known as adaptogens. And when you think about the word adaptogen, it's the adapto, right, and gen, so adapting and producing. So we're talking about cultures or cultural designs that help organizations adapt and produce. And so I want to tell a little story, though, about you, Dr. Pat, that you mentioned to me one day about adaptogens. I had never heard of them. This was a couple years ago or something. And then you challenged me in a great way and said, well, what would adaptogen cultures look like? So of course I went off, because I love conceptual ideas like that, and figured it out. And so it's in the book. So the power of suggestion, but it's a great part to the book. And so we're really talking about cultures that, as I mentioned earlier, when a change or a stressor, right, enters that cultural system, that system can respond to it in hopefully in a proactive way, in a very functional way, in a healthy way, and or the system may even, and this is a little bit later in the book, learn how to anticipate things that might be coming its way. Really start to see what's emerging in the culture.
Yeah. And I think the whole basis for the system that you've created, each of the piece parts by themselves may seem, yeah, of course, that makes sense. But when you put them all together, what you're creating is a resilience in the process. I'm not saying resilience in the organization, because people have talked about that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a process that's resilient against bizarre things that can happen, strange things that can happen. Things like, wow, I create this aspirin type product, I put it on the shelf, and it's not so good. It's a bad batch. It talks about that. But in the process of it, what I'm really struck by is the crossover between talking about things like adaptogen, DNA of organizational excellence, and how these concepts and ideas translate beyond our traditional idea of organizations. So, this is not just about the big corporations. This is about small companies. This is one of these books. When I think about Cultural Brilliance, it applies to when no matter what you're talking about, when two or more people gather, basically.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's true. I think that's true. I mean, I'm deep in a project with a smaller manufacturing company right now, and going really, really well. And one of the things that they actually been around for a few decades, but they suddenly had a spike in sales and growth, and they had a really hard time adapting to it in a way that didn't, and their trying to adapt was to try to do the same things they always had done, which of course didn't work, and their stress levels skyrocketed, right? So we've reversed a lot of that now, but yeah, even something that seems like a great thing, like increased growth and revenue, can cause a lot of stress in the system if the system cannot or does not. It can adapt, but it doesn't know how to adapt, and so it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about this, and let's get right into it now and talk about the idea of the DNA of organizational excellence. So here's what I love about this. When you all read this book, and I'm talking about the book Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of organizational excellence, here's what you're going to find. Well, Claudette, you're saying in the book that you refer to culture as a system.
Yes.
So by the very nature of that, it has an organic and energy to it.
Yeah.
And what I love about it, anytime that people have talked about organic anything in organizations, everybody's head explodes because nobody presents the steps. But you talk about the 6 evolutions of a culture, and then you also talk about make the connection from that to excellence. Tell us how that is done, because without that, culture is done without climate conversations, like how are people happy, and nobody gets results.
Yeah. I mean, the culture, is this, as you said, is this DNA of organizational excellence. So when we look at the historical culture, let's say the historical DNA, and if we looked at a company and we went back 10 years or something, and we were able to say, oh, we can see that we have part of the reason we have the culture we have now is because of these 7 events, right? Or people that came in or whatever over the past decade. And so we can see how the culture itself, and the DNA of that particular culture drives, right, the excellence in the moment. And that's how I see it, right? This culture is, the culture's historical, and the culture is really the DNA of the excellence. And so if you can get your culture going in the right direction in a lot of the different ways we've spoken about, it drives excellence throughout your company, right? So I believe that the excellence really comes from the culture. I mean, and that's that potential piece, I started at the beginning talking about, right? Is you have this opportunity to drive excellence throughout your culture. That's the potential.
Let's talk a little bit about excellence, but more than excellence, I want to tie that to cultural intelligence for a moment, if I could, because there's one of the things that we just blow by, and there are 2 points I want to make about this. One, I want to be clear, you said historical and not hysterical. Because in the end, most of the time when you and I get called into an organization, we're in like hysterical right there.
Right. Yeah, I know.
Right. But the model that you've created, the process that you've created, the system that you've created really addresses, no matter what's going on in the climate of the organization, this is something that can be brought in, used, to really get at not only what's ailing an organization, but what's really working well. And isn't that part of what you call cultural intelligence, and how to sort of model and measure that, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the cultural intelligence. I think another part of cultural intelligence is being able to tune in and sense what's happening in the culture, right?
Yeah.
And so it could be observing a pattern. It could be noticing that seemingly all of a sudden there's a spike in conflict on a team. To me, that's something that's emerging, right? That needs to be handled. And that's part of the cultural intelligence, like emotional intelligence, if we use it that same way, is my ability to, or your ability, or whoever's ability to sense some of those things. And rather than dismissing them as like, oh, well, whatever, those 2 people are having a bad day, actually pay attention to it and see if it's more, is there something trying to emerge? It could be in the team system, maybe not the entire organizational system, but in that team's culture, is there something that's trying to emerge and change, right? And I think that's definitely part of the cultural intelligence as well.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk to you about as you go through the book, you've done something very interesting in the way you define things. And if you folks are going to read the book, you're going to see it. And there's going to be like this light bulb that goes on. Let me give you an example. So when we're looking at, one of the chapters in the book that's called aware integration phase, you call it. You refer to it in a way that pretty much anybody on the planet will be able to understand. You call it the mind of the culture. So you've gone through this and have looked at these, phases in a way that business sees them, but also in the way that humanity sees them, the mind of the culture. Tell us a little bit about how you did that with each of these and why was that important to do?
Yeah, I like to come up with language that represents what I'm trying to do. Like there's an accuracy to it, right? And so of course, we want language that people in business are going to hopefully resonate with, right? That it's but I also want to be really clear in my language so that hopefully, as much as is humanly possible, I'm clear for everybody. So anybody that would read the book, once they read the description of X, Y, or Z idea, right, that they'd understand where we were in the process, what was going on. I mean, and I think there's also a piece about the book I want to mention. It hasn't come up directly yet in our conversation, but I think it's really important. And is the book, one of the things I've gotten feedback on from a couple of early readers who were really gracious enough to read the book and give me some great feedback, said, one thing you do really well in this is it's clear you're taking care of people along the way in the process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that it's not just about, oh, hey, we run this cultural system and this cultural process, and now you have a change. But almost every chapter talks about, and this is what may be happening for people throughout the process. This is how you involve them in the process. They may have some hesitancy around certain changes. This is how you help them out and work with them. So part of this process also is really about how do we help people through it so that they're successful, right? Their potential emerges and they don't end up feeling bad or wrong because we ran a change process, which is often what happens.
Yeah, you know what I love about this? Yeah, too. Let's take a short break because I want to stay with that point. Because one of the things that rarely happens when books are written about culture or any part of the organization, people are not pointed to in a book about what their role is and the care that one wants to take. The examples you give in the book, everything from an economic crisis where bonuses weren't given, these are very specific related to people. And when we come back, I want to talk about the call to action that you put in here that does relate to people. And that is, how do you become a culture whisperer? Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. This is a fabulous book, step by step by step. It explains what cultural brilliance is, but it also explains, for those of you out there, you're thinking, wow, this is for my boss. No, it's for you, because these are the things you're going to want to go back in your organization and say, you know what? Did you know this about that? Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Dr. Pat. I'm really honored to be part of this conversation with Claudette. And I want to just let everybody know that on the Dr. Pat Show on January 22nd, you're going to get to hear part 2 of this with myself and Claudette as we dig deep into not just the book, Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of organizational excellence, but why this is so seriously important for the world we live in today. The other thing I did not mention is this book and the process and the systems and the way that Claudette approaches organizations. This could be applied to an organization, a group, a nation. It can be applied to any organization, any group that comes together. That's why it's so beautiful. Thank you, Claudette, for this. Thank you for writing.
Thank you. Yeah.
I want to talk about something you refer to as culture whisperer. And the reason I do is because that directly relates to people. And this book really is for people, for the people that work in organizations. How does that tie everything together to help shape the DNA of organizational excellence?
Yeah, so the culture whisper, right, is one of the chapters toward the end of the book, and I have a couple of chapters that really focus on leaders and leadership and how a leader needs to participate in this process in order to guide the way through the cultural brilliance process. And one of the things that's interesting that I just want to make sure we mention, because it hasn't come up directly, is that this process, the cultural brilliance system, and I believe any change, doesn't work unless you have the full participation of people from all parts of your organization, all levels. So this is not, hey, our senior leadership read this book and now we're going to go implement this change. No, no, no. This needs to be almost, as many people or as many representatives of different aspects of your company, if it's really large, as you can bring together. So the culture whisper is this idea that a leader, but really anybody could be a culture whisperer in an organization, doesn't need to be a leader. Someone who's able to really come in and harness the emotional energy of an organization, right? And some of the ways that they do that, right, is by getting clear about some of their own blind spots, places they're blind to in the culture, learning how to, what I call, listen to what you hear. One of the best ways to be a culture whisperer is to actually listen to what you hear versus listening to what you wanted to hear or hope to hear, selective hearing. But there's something really powerful that happens, and I've seen it happen when someone in an organization, whether they're official leader or not, actually starts listening to what they hear. And even if it's hard for them, even if it points out, gives them feedback they didn't want to hear, even if it points out a blind spot they have or whatever it is, the fact that they're willing to take in this truth and consider it leads to an amazing conversation afterwards. So so if you can listen like that, you can become an incredible cultural whisperer, because you're going to really tune into the energy of what's going on. You're going to hear all day long in organizations, people are telling other people, they're telling leaders about what they want and need. It might be indirect, right? But they are. And if you as a leader can start to hear that and tune into it, you can become a culture whisperer. Absolutely.
There's one of the things I'm struck by in not just reading the book. It's brilliant. It's really brilliant. I mean, I know that I'm probably more familiar with it and more familiar with your work than most. Mm-hmm. When I see what you've brought together, how you brought it together, what you're modeling, and how important it is in today's world, that's really unprecedented. Now, I know we have a couple of minutes left, and then you're going to be on my show in January, but we were looking at this, all of us, Jessica, myself, Linda, of course, Carter's running the show today. Mm-hmm. And we saw the birth of this. And mm-hmm. yet we all understand, especially Linda in the role she had in corporate America, how important this is. And so here's the question that I want to ask you in literally to close this part one. When people read this book, mm-hmm. they are going to have information perhaps they didn't have before. What would you like the reader to absorb, process, and do now?
What a great question. I think I'd like them to really internalize the fact that their culture can be brilliant. I'd like them to really start looking at culture as untapped potential. And then I'd like them to note places in the book, actions they can take. Like, how could we start assessing our culture and figuring what's authentic and what's not you can't skip that step. So starting at the beginning, but really taking action, even if it's a small step, like, okay, I'm going to apply this to my team of 10 people, right? We're going to try this out first, but do something and find ways to take the principles in the book and adapt them to your organization, right? But I think it's really believing that this is possible, that your culture can be brilliant, and then deciding what steps you can really take and doing it, trying it out. We didn't get to it, but there's a part, this is for part two, but there's a part in the book that talks about prototyping your cultural design. Prototype, try it out.
Yeah.
See how it works, get feedback, move on. So there's a lot of flexibility in this.
Yeah. What I love about this, probably more than anything, is the fact that you get to now take this work into organizations, mm-hmm. help organizations heal, help the people be inspired again, and skill, and bring a new level of cooperation and trust to organizational excellence. And see, that's what I think we're talking about when we say the DNA. You know, there are pieces of this that are part of our culture that go back 100 years ago and maybe more.
Right.
Back. And what you're doing is you are bringing back a level of excellence that most people simply talk about. What you're bringing back is a way for people to achieve that level in dignity and respect and in joy and actually having a great time at work. And I want to thank you for doing that, because taking this kind of message out into the world, in today's world, that is a brilliant effort.
Thank you so much, Pat. And I agree that we can change the DNA, right? We can change the DNA of culture. We can change the DNA of any culture. And it's a really exciting opportunity. And thank you so much for being the guest on my show, but really the interviewer on my show. It was wonderful. It was really fun.
Yeah, we're going to do part 2 on my show on the 22nd, because that's an important day, isn't it?
Just a little bit, the launch day, right? Culturalbrilliance.com. Yes.
I love it. Claudette Rowley, everybody. You're going to hear a lot more of this, especially from us. Thank you, Claudette, for everything. Thank you, Carter. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Linda, for making this happen. And thanks to the TTR team for all the work that they've done, the support that we give our host, and most importantly for Claudette to really practice every principle she has outlined in her book to demonstrate what it takes to move a brilliant culture forward. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the hit show Cultural Brilliance Radio, the DNA of organizational excellence with Claudette Rowley. Conversations that are transforming the world of culture and business. You can download this podcast and find out more about Claudette and her breakthrough work at ClaudetteRowley.com. Please contact Claudette and find out how you can create a brilliant culture.